Salutations and welcome, friends, to another episode of Amalfi Sports. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis, and today we're taking a break from ping-ponging between the East and West Coast and Saratoga and Del Mar to preview a pair of graded stakes races in Chucktown. That's right, folks, we're heading to West Virginia. West by gosh, by golly. And we're going to the Charlestown Oaks and Charlestown Classic that are taking place this Friday evening. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that in the coming weeks, we'll be launching a podcast specifically for horse racing called The Win Place Show. And you can find that on your podcast platform of choice. You can get all of our typical weekly previews for all of the races across the country. That's going to continue to exist both on YouTube, but also on the podcast. So if you're driving to the track, driving to work, you can listen to us there. Also, you're going to have interviews with people from across the horse racing industry on that podcast. And in fact, this week, I just interviewed Acacia Courtney from Naira and Fox Sports. I'm sure many of you have seen her on coverage, covering the paddock and hosting some of the shows at Belmont. And you can get that interview with Acacia, and it was really a very insightful one, on the Amalfi Media YouTube channel or at amalfimedia.com. Additionally, stay up to date with all the daily activity in horse racing by following me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. I have a lot of great content and some giveaways planned in the coming weeks, so you won't want to miss out on those. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this is also obviously Travers Week in Saratoga, and so appropriately, I will be posting some preview videos and picks for those races on Friday morning. Obviously, Travers Day is Saturday, so you'll have plenty of time to check out those previews, get those picks well ahead of race day at Saratoga. And of course, the best place to get all of this is amalfimedia.com. Now, as always, please make sure to like and comment with your thoughts on how you think this Friday evening's race is going to break down, and share with your fellow horse racing fanatics on social media. Okay, let's dive right into a night of the racing at Charlestown, where I'll actually even be at the track. So I'll be wearing this little hat, so come look for me, say, hey, I'd love to meet you, trade some notes, and get to know you a little bit better. So let's dive into the races, and I'm going to preview the two graded stakes races on this card. Of course, the Charlestown Oaks and then the Charlestown Classic. We'll start with the Oaks first, and this is a late post time, 9:45 p.m., but let's go ahead and take a look at the field for the Grade 3 Charlestown Oaks. And as you can see, this is an 11-horse field, kind of, and we're going to get to that in a second, but this is a 7-furlong race on dirt for 3-year-old fillies. And you'll notice a couple of these names. It's a very strong field, but let's run through it real quick. In the one hole, we have Caramel Swirl, trained by Bill Mott and jockeyed by Junior Alvarado. In post 2, we have Street Loot, trained by John Robb and jockeyed by Xavier Perez. And then you have Pauline's Pearl, trained by Steve Asmussen, jockeyed by Brian Hernandez Jr. Then Moonswag, trained by Brendan Walsh and jockeyed by Deshaun Parker. Finally, in 4, you have Fabricate, trained by Ian Wilkes and jockeyed by Louis Saez. In the 6th hole, you have Inject, trained by Brad Cox and jockeyed by Florent Giroux. In the 7th spot, you have Competitive Speed, trained by Xavier Gonzalez and jockeyed by Lionel Reyes. In the 8th hole, you have a horse that we're going to talk a little bit about, Our Adios Jersey, trained by Georgina Baxter and jockeyed by Paco Lopez. In the 9th hole, you have Miss Leslie, trained by Claudio Gonzalez and jockeyed by J.D. Acosta. In the 10th hole, you have All Worthy, trained by Safi Joseph and jockeyed by Tyler Gaffalione. And then in the 11th hole, you have Alayla, who is also eligible. Still waiting to see whether or not Alayla will run, but trained by Cathal Lynch and jockeyed by Charlie Marquez, who I'd like to point out just won the Jockey Award at Pimlico for this last time. So a lot of people might not be familiar with that name, but a very accomplished young jockey who I think we're going to see a lot of in the future. So that is the field for the Charlestown Oaks. And let's take a look at some of the favorites in this particular field. Let's talk about them first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the value. We're not going to hit on all 11 horses. So the three favorites are Caramel Swirl, Pauline's Pearl, and Inject. Caramel Swirl going off at 5-2, Pauline's Pearl at 3-1, and Inject at 9-2. What I'll say about these three is none of them are world beaters. This is not, I mentioned it's Travers Weekend. None of these horses are essential quality. None of these horses are Knicks Go. None of these horses have that sort of dominant run, even at a lower level. It's one thing to say, well, those horses are grade 1 winners. It's not as if we even have consistent grade 3 winners here. So, there's something to like with all three of those horses, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But for Caramel Swirl and Pauline's Pearl, these are horses that have won 2 out of their 7 races. Inject has won 3 out of her 9 career races. Now, what I will say about Inject is she's been 5 for 5 hitting the board this year. A lot to like there. So, like I said, there are features that are promising for some of these horses, but none of these are world beaters. And I think that from a handicapping standpoint actually benefits us a great deal. A, I don't think any of these 3 horses are going to get bet down to an unreasonably low price. And then B, I think there's value in this field for potential upsets, potential long shots. And so we're going to talk about both of those things. So let's talk about the 3 favorites in a little bit more detail. And let's start with Pauline's Pearl. This is a horse that she does have more previous pedigree in terms of previous races, has raced against very strong competition in the past, has had grade 1 competition at the Kentucky Oaks, lost to Malafat, no harm in that, finished well back in that race behind Malafat, Search Results, Will Secret, other horses. So, didn't perform that great there. But has also run a series of grade 3 races, won a grade 3 race, the Fantasy, and so won that race back in April. So this is a graded stakes winning horse, and to that extent, I understand why she's among the favorites. But again, not a world beater, even at the grade 3 level, just not putting in necessarily quality outings. So has hit the board 5 of the 6 times out this year. So consistent in terms of finishing in the money. But again, a horse that, hardly strikes fear into the hearts of her opponents and has not posted awe-inspiring speed number, typically in the mid to low 80s for most of her races recently. So, that's kind of where we are on Pauline's on Pauline's Pearl. Now, what I will say, she's taking a step back in distance. Only has run under a mile once before. And that's interesting to me because her pedigree would suggest that she would actually like more distance, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So while typically I do like horses that are taking a step back in distance to, perform a little bit better, going from a mile and a 16th to 7 furlongs, I'm just worried looking at the fractions she's run and in the races she's run previously, I'm worried some of the fractions in this are going to be a lot faster. And some of her workouts aren't suggesting that she's got that blazing speed. So again, a perfectly good horse, not blowing me off the page though with some of her past performances, some of her speed numbers. Now, let's transition to a horse that does have a little bit of an eye-popping speed number in terms of Caramel Swirl. Last time out, this is a horse that ran the best speed number in the race in 95. If she runs a 95 again, this thing's over. I don't know if she will, though. I mean, she's never run that close to that before. We'll see if she runs that well again. I mean, her previous best speed number was an 88. Now, she does like the distance. 7 furlongs does seem to fit her quite well. She's won 2 out of her last 3 at that distance and 2 of her last 3 races, in fact. So there is a lot to like in that regard. You also have to like the connections, Godolphin and Bill Mott, in terms of breeder and trainer. Great combination. Also, Junior Alvarado has ridden her for both of her wins. So she, as I said, she's won 2 out of her 7 races. Junior's been on the ride both times. when I look at that, that means something to me to see, does Junior just know how to ride this horse a little bit more effectively? Is he in tune with this horse a little bit more? Having ridden horses a very little bit myself, I can tell you they respond differently to different people. And that is something that I always try to take into consideration, the success a particular jockey has had on a specific horse. As I said, though, the question is whether or not she will be able to replicate that last effort out and doing it under more pressure. See, that's the thing. Last time out, she ran that 95 at a $103,000 allowance race. Now we're stepping up to a grade 3 race. So we're moving up in competition. It's easy to run that fast sometimes against lesser competition. It's a little bit difficult to run that type of race when you're being pushed for pace, when you're being pushed more assertively within a field, an 11 horse field on top of that. So there are still some questions there, but I do like Caramel Swirl. I think she's a very good filly and one that I like quite a bit in terms of betting on for this particular race. Then let's move to Inject. This is a horse that hits the board 5 out of 5 times this year has hit the board, most recently at the grade 3 level. Has a similar profile to Caramel Swirl in that there's not a ton of graded stakes competition, only one graded stakes race, really. Additionally, has never done 7 furlongs, only 6.5, 6, 5, 5.5. So has done slightly more sprints. Pedigree would suggest that won't be an issue, and more importantly, has put up relatively consistent speed numbers. Has not seen massive fluctuations, so you kind of know what you're going to get with this horse. I don't like Inject to win, but I think Inject's going to hit the board because I think that's what that horse just does. I think that's what she does nearly every time out. So I do like her on the back end of a trifecta or a superfecta. So I think there's something there to like. Now let's talk a little bit about 3 long shots that I think actually provide a fair amount of value in this race. And I'm going to start with Street Loot. And I'm not entirely sold on this horse, but I think this horse provides some interesting value. One of the things that is intriguing to me is this is the only horse in the field who has a trainer and or jockey, and in this case both, who have experience at Charlestown this year. If you're looking at the past performances, if you're looking at a racing form, you just look at the graphic we popped up on the screen. These are, a lot of these horses have big time trainers. They're not camping out at Charlestown. They're at Saratoga, they're at Del Mar, they're at Monmouth, they're at other tracks. And so they're shipping a lot of these horses in. Well, Street Loot, interestingly, has a trainer that's run several horses at Charlestown this year, been very successful there, has a jockey that has run at Charlestown this year and been very successful there. So I like that a little bit. I like knowing that the jockey knows how the dirt is going to run, how the track tends to run, where it tends to be fast, where it tends to be slow. I do like that a little bit. Additionally, if you look at this horse's past performances, she loves 7 furlongs. She's great at 7 furlongs. Whenever she gets moved off 7 furlongs, there's problems. When she moves down, when she moves up, does not perform as well. Great at 7 furlongs. The other reason I think you're going to get great value on this horse is she delivered a clunker the last time out. And I was actually there in person because it was opening day at Colonial Downs in New Kent, Virginia, which is not far from me. And so I was at that race, 5.5 furlongs. That's an interesting turf course. We had Jessica Paquette, who's the handicapper of Colonial Downs, on the show, actually. She talked about that. Additionally, that was the first time Street Loot's ever run on turf. Didn't respond well. Just wasn't very good. So, I think I can excuse that to some extent. But I think people are going to get hung up on that, look at that, and I think this horse's numbers are only going to go up from 8 to 1. Additionally, has had some strong 5 furlong workouts. So, again, there's a lot there to like with Street Loot. Do I like her more than some of the other ones I just mentioned? A little bit. I mean, I actually maybe like her a little bit more than Inject. I could see her kind of slipping in potentially in the back end of a superfecta or a trifecta. So We'll see. Now, I want to talk about two horses that I do like a lot and I think provide outstanding value, and that is our Adios Jersey and Alayla. And they're very, very similar horses. They're both going off at 12 to 1. Our Adios Jersey, to me, fits a profile that I tend to like with horses. And this is where you can find value a lot of times, is a horse going into a graded stakes race who has less experience than the other horses in the field. In this case, our Adios Jersey only has 4 career races. Most of these other horses have 7, 8, 9, 10 or more. Additionally, our Adios Jersey gets faster every time out. That's what I love to see from a younger horse, is that every time out, this horse seems to be learning something, seems to be finding itself, and is also stepping up in distance every time out, going from 5 to 6 to 7 furlongs. And guess what? Keeps winning 4 for 4 in her young career. The best performance yet was at 7 furlongs, which was just the most recent one. Interestingly, Georgina Baxter, not a common name, but has had a lot of success this year as a trainer. Paco Lopez, who ran Midnight Bourbon at the Haskell very infamously and fell, thankfully was okay. But Paco's had a nice year. People are going to remember that spill at Monmouth, but the reality is Paco Lopez has had a very nice year and wins, well over 20% of his mounts. So again, a lot to like there. I also like that looking at her past performances, she's flexible. She can be early speed. She can also sit back and come from behind. And just recently, I've seen a lot of horses that fit this profile do well. You look at a horse like Dr. Chevelle at the Bing Crosby. Now, granted, Dr. Chevelle had a little bit more class, obviously, had already won a Grade 1 Futurity. But Dr. Chevelle was a horse going up against a lot of really experienced horses in that Bing Crosby field. And guess what? Was very lightly raced, but had constantly improving speed numbers, blew the competition away. Just last week, you look at a horse like Astronaut in the Del Mar Handicap. Again, a little bit more lightly raced, constantly improving numbers, won, and was a long shot. Even a horse like Tripoli, transition to dirt, was a horse that hadn't really run on dirt very much. 2 races only, comes out, wins the Pacific Classic. So I like that profile a little bit. I think you can find value there. Alayla's very similar, kind of same song, second verse. In fact, even less experience though. Only 3 career races, has won the last 2. I mentioned Charlie Marquez, very good young jockey. I believe it's still only 19 years old actually, but just won the Pimlico jockey standings. Very good young jockey. I think you're going to hear a lot from this young man moving forward. Workout numbers are a little concerning. Distance might be a slight concern. Only ever raced at 6 furlongs. This is at 7. But again, for the value, I like Alayla. Now, the also eligible, I'm assuming she's running, but I'm not 100% sure. So we're just going to have to wait and see until race day. So how do I see the Charlestown Oaks breaking down? Well, I got to put my money where my mouth is. I just talked all about our Adios Jersey. And so that's how I see it. I have 8-1-3-2. I have Adios Jersey to win. I have Caramel Swirl to finish second. I have Pauline's Pearl to finish third. And I like Street Loot to come in and complete the superfecta. So that's how I see the Oaks playing out. So let's move to the Grade 2 Charlestown Classic for 3-year-olds and up. And let's take a look at that field. And as I mentioned, this is a 1 1/8 on dirt for 3-year-olds and up, a 10-horse field. Starting off with Warrior's Charge, trained by Brad Cox, jockeyed by Florent Giroux. Noble Drama, trained by David Fawkes and jockeyed by Angel Cruz. In the 3-hole, you have Rushy, trained by Mike McCarthy and jockeyed by Victor Espinoza. In the 4-hole, you have Bourbon Calling, trained by Ian Wilkes and jockeyed by Brian Hernandez Jr. Then Informative, trained by Uriah Lewis and jockeyed by Jose Ferrer. In the 6-hole, you have, I just refer to it as New York Traffic. I know I've heard sometimes people refer to it as NY Traffic or NY Traffic, but I call it New York Traffic, trained by Safi Joseph Jr. and jockeyed by Tyler Gaffalione. In the 7-hole, you have Sleepy Eyes Todd, who won this race last year, trained by Miguel Angel Silva and jockeyed by Rye Eichelberry. In the 8-hole, you have Art Collector. That's a big name. I'm sure a lot of people have heard. Trained by Bill Mott and jockeyed by Louis Saez. In the 9-hole, you have Restrained Vengeance, trained by Val Brickerhoff and jockeyed by Edwin Maldonado. And then finally, you have Air Token, trained by Jose Corrales and jockeyed by J.D. Acosta. And so that is the field for the Charlestown Classic. And again, let's take a look at the favorites. And there are two that I want to look at. One is Art Collector going off at 5-2. The other is Warriors Charge going off at 3-1. Let's start with Art Collector. Obviously, huge reputation, ran in the Preakness last year. Very good horse. Made a run through the Triple Crown. Faced a lot of great competition, a lot of graded stakes experience. What impresses me about Art Collector, though, is the pedigree at this distance. 3 for 3 at a mile and an eighth. I like that. That you can't say that about every horse in this field, or even most of the horses in this field. So it's going to like this distance. And has performed well at this distance when given the opportunity. This is also an interesting horse, and I think you're kind of like the Oaks. I think you're still going to get good value with the favorites. I mean, 5-2 for this horse, I think is actually really good value. I wouldn't be surprised if I don't think it's going to get bet down that much. And I say that because starting at the tail end of last year, Art Collector really started to regress. You started to see declining speed numbers, declining results, just really seemed to be struggling. Took some time off, changed trainer and jockey. Now we have a new trainer, Bill Mott. Now we have a new jockey, Louis Saez. Ran the last time out at the Aladar and absolutely crushed the competition, looked like his old self. Ran a 100 buyer speed number and looked like the Art Collector of, prime last year. So again, I think people might be scared away because they might have seen that dip in production towards the end of last year, and only that one, new race recently, the Aladar, where you saw him really step up. But I do like Art Collector quite a bit in this race. Now let's go to Warriors Charge at 3-1. This is a good horse, but I don't really love the value here at 3-1. This is a horse that's only hit the board 2 out of the 4 times he's run this year. Hit the board. Hasn't won at all this year, but only hit the board twice. Again, at 3-1, I just don't love that value. Now, granted, he ran some big races against big competition. If I'm not mistaken, he ran against Maxfield. And so, this is a horse that, like I said, ran against some very, very legitimate competition. Yeah, lost to Maxfield last time out, in fact. Ran against Mimosa, CZ Rocket, Silver State. I mean, these are good horses that he's losing to, no doubt about it. But again, I'm not necessarily falling over myself to get to the betting window to put money on Warriors Charge. So, I think there are some issues there. I also think distance might not be ideal. I think a mile and a 16th is probably the best distance. And I don't think he doesn't have the high end speed to suggest that his best effort's going to win. There are other horses in this field who have run several points better than Warriors Charge. And we're going to talk about a couple of those, but I worry that Warriors Charge again could be in play at the back end of some exotics. I just don't necessarily love that 3-1 value. So let's take a look at some of the other horses that might provide some better value. Coming in at the 3-hole, Rushy coming in at 5-1. I'm really torn as to whether that's good value or bad value. I'm leaning towards the latter. This is a horse that does have a grade 2 victory last year at the Pat Day Mile. As the name of that race would indicate, I think Rushy does slightly better at a little bit less distance, at a mile or less. That said, has also run against some big competition as well. So not going to be too big for this field. And the reason I do like Rushy, and I think, again, I go back and forth on this horse, but the reason, if you're going to make a case for Rushy, the workout numbers have been phenomenal. He's been running, 59-2, 59-3, 5 furlong workouts. So the workout is there. The speed is there. Now, is the mile and an eighth going to get him? Maybe, but there's enough to like there. I'll be interested to see how this horse moves from the morning line to post time once money starts coming in, because that could really determine how much I'm willing to include Rushy on some of my tickets, even a win ticket potentially. But how much I'm willing to bring Rushy in on exotics like an exacta and a trifecta. If he's offering 5-1 or better value, I love it. If he's going down to 3-1 or something like that, I stop loving it so much. So value is going to be an important part there in terms of how you think about Rushy. Now, Bourbon Calling. This is a horse that, if you're looking to add value, this is a horse that's 15-1. This horse is going to add some value. Now, the question that you have is this horse going to continue to improve? Because as the horse is right now this year, probably not going to be able to scratch the top 3. However, if you're going to look inside the numbers, this horse took a nice long layoff, had kind of similar to Art Collector, had been declining a little bit, took a long layoff, ran earlier this year, okay, ran an 80 Beyer speed number, came back about a month or so later, ran a 92, finished 3rd place at a grade 3. The question is there another gear? You know, we knocked off the rust the first time out. We refined ourselves the second time out. Is the third time out going to be a little bit better? Are we going to get up to a 95, a 97? Are we going to be able to run a little bit faster in that space? Distance might be an issue, but what I'll say about Bourbon Calling is won at Charlestown before. And for the price, again, I think you can do worse than throwing, a few bucks on a show bet on a horse that's 15-1 and probably going to go up from there. So, do I think, if I'm trying to, I think this is where you get into the differentiation between picking a race and handicapping a race, or looking for value and betting on a race. If I'm picking a race, I'm not picking Bourbon Calling to win. If I'm trying to predict who's going to win the race. But from a handicapping standpoint and from a value standpoint, the horse has something. And that's interesting to me. And there are certain bets that I would want to include Bourbon Calling on because it's going to add a lot of potential value. Again, it's a little bit like the roulette table. You kind of spread your money around. Sometimes you make a lot of really small little bets, but they could hit big. And so Bourbon Calling is, like I said, one of those horses that I think is intriguing. Another horse that's intriguing is Restrained Vengeance, going off at 10-1. This is a horse that is making a transition to dirt. And that said, is overwhelmingly a turf horse, has run on dirt before, and most importantly, has won on dirt at this distance. So there's something to like there. It's a horse that's run some nice, consistent speed numbers the last 3 times out on turf, ran 3 straight 94s. So you kind of know what you're going to get with this horse. The question is whether or not that speed will translate onto the dirt. Unfortunately, it's been so long since he's run on dirt that it's hard to kind of go back and look at those past performances and go, that's how I'm going to extrapolate how he's going to run this time. Again, at 10-1, I think there's ample value on the back end of a trifecta to suggest that this horse might be worth the value. But unlike a horse like Tripoli, who I mentioned earlier, who won the Pacific Classic, Tripoli at least had 2 races on dirt under his belt before the Pacific Classic. So you had a little bit more to go off of. Tripoli also didn't go off at 10-1. But again, with Restrained Vengeance, it's about whether or not is this horse, you're taking a little bit of a leap of faith that he's going to be able to post that big number the first time back out on dirt in quite a while. Sleepy Eyes Todd, this is a winner I feel bad. I toss this horse. Sleepy Eyes Todd won last year's Charlestown Classic. I think for that reason, right now it's 6-1. I think this horse is going to get bet down unreasonably so. I think this horse is going to get bet down to like 4-1, 9-2, something along those lines. I don't like that value at all. Something happened to this horse last year. This horse was coming along well, was winning, was beating good horses like Frenzy Fire. This horse was a monster last year to some extent. And then all of a sudden ran a really disappointing 4th at a grade 1 down in Gulfstream. Then was shipped overseas and the wheels just completely came off and looked terrible at the Saudi Cup, terrible at the Dubai World Cup. Then came back here in April in the States and ran, but was nowhere near the same horse and not putting up anywhere near the same speed numbers. I just have a feeling this is going to be more of a sentimental selection for a lot of people. Oh, this is the horse that won last year. I'll put a couple bucks. And they'll see 6-1 initially and go, oh, that's good value. I just don't know if I just don't like Sleepy Eyes Todd at that price. And like I said, I'll be shocked if that number goes up. If it does, good for the bettors on kind of realizing this horse might be fool's gold. But I have a feeling you're going to have a lot of casual fans who are going to bet on this horse because it won last year. So the final horse I want to talk about is New York Traffic. I'm going off at 8-1. Why do I like this horse? I like this horse because he can run a big number. He can go 103, Beyer speed number. Distance might be an issue. I think a mile is kind of his sweet spot in a lot of ways. Informative, who's another horse in this field, beat him 2 times out, which doesn't look great on paper, but I think that's more of a fluke than anything. I think Informative ran the race of his life 2 times out. I think I just don't see Informative replicating that effort again. And I see New York Traffic, despite being beaten in that race, still ran a very strong speed number. And most recently was 4th at the Monmouth Cup with a really strong pace. I don't think the pace is going to be quite as fast in this, so I don't think you're going to see him necessarily wear out. So New York Traffic's a horse, again, at 8-1. I like the value there. And I think that this is a horse that can run competitively. This is a horse that can run against big fields and can perform well. So I do like it. So how do I see the Charlestown Classic playing out? Well, listen, I'd love to go against chalk because that's where the money is. But at the end of the day, I see it 8-6-3-1. That's Art Collector to win. I have New York Traffic to place. I have Rushy to show. I have Warriors Charge to come in 4th. So that's the way I see the Charlestown Classic breaking down. And that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the preview of the races at Charlestown. And remember to check out my blog for the picks on all the races on Friday's card, as well as my picks and previews for the huge weekend at Saratoga, all of those graded stakes races, all those grade 1 stakes races at Travers Weekend. And the only place to get all of that is on amalfimedia.com. Finally, just a reminder to subscribe to Amalfi Media on YouTube. Be on the lookout for the launch of the Win Place Show podcast. Follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace, and check out amalfimedia.com for all the great horse racing content you need to get through the Breeders' Cup season and beyond. Until next time, I'm Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.